voyage with our new webinar series. And so I have to admit to being a little nervous about GoToMeeting's ability to chew gum and walk at the same time. So I'm going to focus pretty heavily if anything should go south on us on the audio to make sure we maintain that. But I think we're expecting all good things. So just as a heads up there. Also, as I mentioned, we're going to mute the lines as we can from the background. If I fail to do that, if you could do that on your end, that would be great. Please use the chat box at the bottom, because what we're going to do is we'd like to leave some time for questions at the end where we have time. If we can hit them along the way, we will. But certainly we'll leave some time at the very end for questions. I know we've got some folks joining us from the East Coast today, as well as on the West Coast. So we're super thrilled to have everybody today. Let's jump right into our agenda for today. It's really simple, right? We're going to do a few minutes of just kind of who we are. There's a number of you that we have met before and a number of you that we haven't, and we just want to make sure you kind of are aware of what you're getting yourself into today. We'll cover our main topic, which is, of course, how to develop an enterprise solution strategy. And then we'll leave room for question and answer at the end. And so with that, I'm going to go ahead and get started. A little bit about us. My name is Erin Koss. So I'm the founder and CEO at Site Consulting Group. We've been in business since about 1999. I actually started my career running the back office of my family's fly fishing stores, a small retail store at the time, and it's kind of how I got my feet wet with IT and ERP and business process and accounting and things like that. Essentially did my first system implementation at that time, which I will call a backwoods office of the QuickBooks at the time. From there, I got my CPA in the state of Oregon and went on to work for a national accounting firm, their business consulting practice, which was growing rapidly mid and late 90s, where we had a chance to build an Oracle consulting and an SAP consulting practice. So swung from the very small end to the very large end, which for me was, I felt, some really great perspective in the course of my career and really set the stage for, I think, giving me some great perspective as later going into the year 2000 and on, the firm and I jumped into focusing on small and mid-sized companies. Really, as ERP became available to that market, we shifted our focus, feeling like we could have a bigger impact. A little bit more about our team and how we focus. You know, as I said, I've been doing this for 25, 30 years. The folks that are on our team are all over the country, a little more concentrated on the West Coast, but they too have broad business backgrounds like I do, and I think almost all of them have some sort of ERP or business process reengineering focus. And in addition to that, most of them are project managers and have what I call sort of a specialty leg, which is going to be focused in technology or in development or in one of the other areas. So we generally have folks on our team with no less than 15 years of experience. We are mostly focused, or I should say most of our time is focused in the ERP space. And what I mean by that really is not so much that it's actually focused on ERP, but those are the projects we get called upon for most frequently, mostly because they're just good-sized projects and they involve a lot of moving parts. And usually companies in the small and mid-sized range really do need some outside help with those projects because it's just not what they do every day. When we focus on ERP, for us, it's about helping companies select, implement, and optimize those installations and kind of all of the pieces that go into those projects. So we really look at them as people, process, technology, cultural alignment projects, if you will. And so although ERP may be kind of the big lever someone or company is pulling, it's really about aligning those other areas. We're going to talk a lot about that today, actually, as we talk about building an enterprise solution strategy. Beyond ERP, our niche tends to be manufacturing. We spend a lot of time there. I think really just, you know, that's where the complexity is when you start doing these projects. And so that's where our passion is. We find them interesting and exciting to work with. More recently, I would say in the last 5 or 10 years, we focused a little more on consumer packaged goods, food and beverage, medical device, and biotech. Although frankly, we've seen just about all sorts of manufacturing and distribution at this point. Finally, this is the stuff that matters to us most. At the end of the day, our role with our clients is to be an integral part of their team, and for us to be good team members in that way, as well as good team members as we work together internally at Site Consulting Group. The things that matter to us is that we treat each other in a loving and kind way. We feel like we're really committed to doing the right thing at all costs, if you will. Dedicated to excellent work. We pride ourselves on being really good communicators, try and be real candid while also being kind, and trying to have a balanced work and life. Most of us have traveled a good part of our career, and so we're trying real hard to manage that at this point. So that's enough about us. What I'd like to do is get started here a little bit. I guess I have one more thing I forgot about is I just want to give you a sense of, if I talk about who we are, this is a little smattering of who our clients are, some of which you might recognize. Some are national, some are more local to the Pacific Northwest. But these are some of the clients that we've worked with over the years, and I'll tell you, most of them are like family, so we really pride ourselves on that. I always say when you exit a project having been asked to stick around for Thanksgiving dinner, you usually have done your job. So we're real pleased to do business with these companies. So with that, let's get to the reason why we're here. What is an enterprise solution strategy? So today, in the land of acronyms and buzzwords that we live in, I like to start generally with defining the key concepts, mostly just because a lot of these words that we use can mean a couple things to different people. So I want to just talk about what we mean here. I grappled a little bit with the idea of an enterprise solution strategy when really it's more of an enterprise resource strategy. So take either way, I think will work. I can tell you what it's not. An enterprise strategy is not solely about software, right? I talked about how we get lots of calls for help with ERP, and we really try and ask our clients to step up a level from there and ask themselves, what are they really trying to do on an enterprise-wide? So we like to say that it's not about software. It's really about your business. So enterprise solution strategy is all about your business. And then secondly, the way we like to think about it is that what we call an ESS, or an enterprise solution strategy, is a plan for utilizing all of an organization's resources, and we do mean all, to optimize core business processes in order to accelerate the rate of change. So to say a couple things about this, why I'm focused so heavily on core business processes, although we're going to talk about a lot of different pieces and what we mean by all the resources within an organization. What are those resources? We're going to talk about that in a minute. But when we talk about, the reason we highlight the core business processes is because at the end of the day, we're living in an environment where we have to move so much faster than we used to have to move from a technology perspective. We've got our retail customers competing with Amazon now, who can do things in 1 click, and 10 clicks won't do it any longer. Or the manufacturing, in our manufacturing companies trying to get their products to market quickly through their distribution channel, in the grocery stores, into the consumer's hands. Again, it's a 5-click exercise, not a 10 or 20 anymore. And so we're going to talk a lot about that today. So we feel like if companies will really take a hard look at their core business processes, those that are most important to their enterprise, and start focusing those resources around how to improve those, they'll be able to be most competitive and grow at scale over time. So when we talk about resources and the elements of those, of a solution strategy, what are we talking about? So for us, there's a lot in the weeds here, but we're going to really focus here today. So we're talking about company, we're talking about culture, we're talking about the people. Again, we talked about processes being really critical here, systems and technology. So it really comes down to what is the, it's not about a single project. It's really when a company is able to put a broader strategy together that really looks at the interconnectedness of all 6 of these pieces, we really find that the result is a more flexible, cohesive, nimble, and competitive organization. So before you dive into an ERP project or an IT infrastructure upgrade, or you take on the next, Lean Six Sigma optimization project, we really want clients to take a trip to the mountaintop and look at the big picture. Today, we're going to talk about where are you trying to go, where are you today, and ask you to consider these elements individually and then collectively, with the end result being really a plan, or what we'll call a roadmap, to get you from here to there in a way that really your company can digest. One other thing I want to mention before we move on to kind of the how and some of the details is that one of the nuances to these 6 elements, and I think this is a place where our organization plays heavily with our clients, and it's just it really has to do with this is what we do all day. Our clients make a product or B product or offer a service of some sort. For us, the service we offer is helping our clients kind of understand and know where in the life cycle are these 6 things. Well, I should say the 3 things, right? So from an organization perspective, our clients are the experts in their company and their culture and their people. That's where they know and best for sure. And then what we really bring to the table, and the piece you have to really think about when you're looking at these elements are where in the maturity and life cycle, if you're looking into the future, are kind of process best practice, ERP, and other enterprise solutions. We'll talk about a few other things today, things like business intelligence and mobile apps and EDI and e-commerce. Like, where are these applications in their life cycle? Particularly as we talk about cloud and how to deploy solutions in an enterprise setting, where are these products in their life cycle is something that I think we're really able to help our clients with. And the piece we bring to the table. So again, thinking about where you are today and where you're trying to go, we're going to talk about the best way to get there, and just recognizing that based on where the life cycle is of these things, it's going to require a lot of trade-offs for a lot of reasons. So we'll talk more about that today. So as we talk about how are we going to get there, I almost laugh at how simple this is at some level. It makes it look really simple, and yet we know that it's not, right? But essentially, we're going to ask a lot of different questions in each of those categories, and you'll see that those questions are the answer to one question is certainly related to and has an impact on the other. There's timing, dependencies, et cetera. But what you're really going to see here is the way to get to that prioritized roadmap, ultimately that solution strategy, is just to ask a whole ton of questions. All right, so let's ask yourself a question. Consider the following. If someone told you that for $5,000, they would provide you with a vacation deal of a lifetime, would you just spend the money without knowing where you were going, who you were going with, or what you needed to take with you, right? So the answer is obviously a big no. Our time is probably the most precious resource that we have. And we want to make sure that we're going to get all the value that we can from what is really very valuable time off in this day and age, as busy as we all are. We're going to talk today about why it's so important to have an enterprise solution strategy before you start any one-off process, right? The goal really, again, to having this ESS that we keep talking about is mitigating risk, using resources like your people and your dollars wisely, and ensure that you're going to get that return on investment, which justifies spending that money and time. So let's look at this from a 30,000-foot level for just a minute. Today is really about getting at the questions that you need to ask in each of those areas that we talked about, those 6 elements, to get to a comprehensive ESS. When you're through, the good news is you'll also have the stage set or the table set, I think, really well for doing any kind of selection process. So whether that's technology or a petite piece of software, enterprise, or a more verticalized product like a CRM or an HR type of solution, the stage will be set for doing that. A lot of these questions apply way down in the weeds as well. But we're going to, so the stage will be set for that. So what we're going to talk about today, and this is kind of at the high level, right? So what we want to do is look at the where, who, and the what. So when I ask ourselves today, when you're in your organization, asking yourself today, where are you right now? What's working today? What's the company doing well today? And where do you want to be in the next 3 to 10 years? Who's on the team today, right? If you're expecting a growth rate of a certain amount, who are you going to need tomorrow, and at what level, and with what skills? And where might you have trouble filling those gaps or those skills that you need, those roles that you need? I know a lot of our manufacturing clients right now are having a real struggle getting really great labor on their shop floors. And as they grow rapidly, that's a big concern. Finally, the what. So we talk about the processes, the tools, these are the systems that your people use to get the work done. What are you going to need tomorrow? And what's that going to look like to remain competitive and to grow at scale? So now I'm going to take a minute and I'd like to give you an example. I want to show you a quick video. This is a customer video, and I'm going to do some things with my audio to hopefully allow you to see it a little better. One of the things you might notice, depending on your connection, the feedback we've received is the video can be maybe a little wonky, but the audio should be just fine. So as long as you can get the audio, we're in good shape. If you have any challenges, if you perk on up in the chat window and let us know, that would be great. Would appreciate it. So this is about a 45-second video. Just give it a listen for us.
I'm Steve Feldkamp, and I'm the Chief Operating Officer of Umpqua Dairy Products Company. We decided about 10 years ago to implement an ERP system in our company. That project became a total failure, and after a year and a half, we canceled the project. However, we still needed to implement an ERP system. Through a friend, we heard about Erin Koss and Site Consulting. Erin worked pretty diligently with us, starting with getting our company networked, which is something we hadn't even considered, helping us select a software company that provided us with a workable ERP solution, and she helped implement it. So after several years, we are now up and running, and it was a successful implementation. And we're very happy that the system is working as expected, and that our business has improved tremendously as a result of that.
Okay, so we're back with you here. So truth be told, Steve did that video for us as a customer testimonial for our website. I wanted to use it today because I really feel like it does a good example. It does a great job of talking about some of the elements that we want to talk about today. So we're going to move into what we call the ESS at sea level. So this is in the weeds, if you will. And so I want to walk through these a little bit using Umpqua as an example that I think it is. So, for starters, Umpqua Dairy is a third generation. It's a $100 million company. Over time, they don't expect their product mix to change, but they did expect, and this is 10 years ago when we started this project, almost 10 years ago, where they don't expect their product mix to change in the dairy business. It's milk, butter, and cheese, right? And if any of you are familiar with their products in the Pacific Northwest, these guys do it all. Ice cream, also ice cream. But they don't expect the mix to change, but they did expect distribution to increase. And they have their own route drivers to the tune of about 75 of them at the time. So the people that they employ, they're the major employer in a small Southern Oregon city where if people are a good fit, they go, they stay, they don't leave. In fact, when we were there, the order entry supervisor of the time had been there for going on 50 years almost. I think it was 47 years at the time. But she'd been there since she was 17, and she was then in her late 60s when we arrived. I can tell you that change was not her favorite thing, and she was a pretty grumpy lady. But by the time we were done, she was, I always laugh, I said, by the time we were done, Carol was making me a quilting bag and inviting me to have wine with her on a weekly basis. So I will say that we know we've done our job well when we can get the folks that have been in an organization the longest to make the changes that the leadership is asking us to help them make. So we were pretty excited about that. Additionally, from a people perspective, I want to talk about the idea that when they went into the project, they didn't have the people on the team that could really get the job done. Most of these large organizational change initiatives require what we like to call a core team, but a team that's really going to be focused on the effort and what's really many efforts usually over a period of time. The project they did, by the time they did everything they were really trying to do, and it was a massive a change for them. As Steve mentioned, we were talking about networks and we were talking about adding people. and automating all the way through to a brand new ERP solution. So there's a lot of changes going on. But before we started, we had to hire an IT manager, we had to hire a controller. Because of where they're located, we didn't have the luxury of the cloud at the time, or the internet connectivity speeds to do some of the things you might be able to do now. So they were a conservative company, family-owned, hardworking. Change definitely is not something they're going to do fast down there. When we talk about their ERP solution and the systems going on around them, they were dealing with really antiquated systems. Some of you might recall the AS400. I know my IT guys on the line will remember the AS400. It was an incredible tool, incredible solution. Any applications that ran on that box stayed up and worked. The problem was they got to the place where they didn't offer the same robust functionality the new ERP solutions do, as well as the development staff and programmers that support those applications, as well as the back-end databases and the developers were retiring. And so they were really dealing with a solution that was no longer going to be supported. Because it lacked the functionality on the system side that they needed, or that you could achieve in the more modern era, many of their processes were manual. They were using Excel if they were lucky, and a lot of paper. And so their big challenges were really having good visibility into inventory control, having the decision-making tools they needed to be nimble and flexible, and just being able to have that efficiency when delivering product to customers, which at that time was paper invoices. And so the amount of paper they generated was enormous. And because they were doing things manually and their processes took 20 steps when they should have taken 5, they made a lot of mistakes, a lot of errors, and that affected their inventory levels. So as you can imagine, for a company this size, those types of challenges were really required them to do something different. And when they went in, and Steve mentioned this in the video, that they had started an ERP, they'd selected an ERP tool, which is something they had never done before, and began implementing it. And over about a year and a half time, they'd spent close to $300,000, I believe, by then on the software and the time it was taking to implement and the services, and they had to scrap the project. And what it came down to, and Steve and I have talked about this a lot, but what it came down to was they were going somewhere they had never been, without enough people, and really without knowing how to approach the process of evaluation and selection, but also looking at it as just a one-off solution. So it was this ERP thing, as Steve mentioned, they didn't even know they needed the network. They didn't think about that. They really weren't thinking about the change management exercise. The order entry supervisor we talked about was really, really tough in the beginning of that project, because the way the organization had communicated in the past with their employees didn't require a super soft touch there. They didn't have to think about change management and how she would feel about those things and how critical she was to the process. So all of those things, as we talked about a few minutes ago, we talked about the company and the culture, IT, people, process, systems. All of them are connected. So we really say to our clients, hey, get above whatever individual project you're doing, and let's look at it from a more comprehensive level. So one of the things I show you here, you've got, when we talk about C-level, we're going to talk about each of the areas individually, just to sort of bring up and highlight some of the key questions we think need to be asked. We're going to, hopefully, John, when we're done here, is going to be able to send you a more detailed version of these templates. And they're really intended for you to have a little more, just a lot of detail behind some of the questions that you want to go back to your organization and ask. Now, not all questions will apply to you, but we really want to get you off on the right foot. This is essentially the tools we use oftentimes, or some of them, to do the discovery that we do with clients when we hit the ground to try and help them develop an ESS at times. And so these are the tools that we use with our clients, and we hope they'll serve you as well. So let's talk about the company, right? We talked about that. Where are we now and where are we going? Now, one thing I want to point out is I recognize that a lot of the folks on the call, you're in middle management, you're senior management, you may not necessarily be the CEO or the CFO. And so sometimes, and we recognize this, when they ask you to do a project and they say basically ready, set, go, and hurl it over the fence. And, it's difficult to put on the brakes and say, whoa, wait a minute, where are you trying to go and ask a lot of these questions that we're asking? So we recognize that this is, kind of an 80-20 rule here, maybe 60-40 in some organizations, right? Where you don't get permission or the luxury to ask as many of these questions as you'd like. What we would encourage you to do is do the best you can do, because the more information you have, the more you'll be able to serve that organization. And frankly, the better results you're going to have in the end. And we'll talk some more about that as well. But when we talk about the company, we're saying, where are we now? What are we at? Where are we going? Some questions to answer. And these are the questions, and I'll tell you, leadership teams, executive teams don't always like to be pushed on this, because I'm amazed at how often they don't actually have detailed plans in these areas, especially on the smaller side companies. The bigger the company, they generally have this some level of this figured out. But keep in mind that you may be challenging somebody who doesn't like to say they don't know or they're not sure. And so take that with a grain of salt. Most of you know the executives that you report to, and I'm sure can consider that. But these are the questions that we want to ask. And we're asking about, where are we now? What industry are you in today? Is that going to be the same industry tomorrow? So for example, you're a manufacturer today. Are you going to be in distribution as well in 3, 5, 10 years? That is something to be aware of. What is your growth rate? Are you growing really rapidly, or are you relatively flat and just have to make some system changes in order to just compete? So is it a growth strategy? Is it a competition strategy? So you see these other questions, naming 3 opportunities company has yet to act on. Again, you're trying to get a sense for where are we going and what do we have to worry about, okay? Next, and as I said, super important here, we want to talk about business processes. And I say that because remember, in the new world that we live in, the technology we use, the systems we select, the people that we hire, all have a huge impact on how efficient our business processes are going to be in the end. And if you think about, let's just take a really core process as an example. I'm going to use Umpqua again as an example because that's where we started. For them, the order to cash process, like many of you, is really, really critical. So for them, they have very high volume in terms of number of transactions, but they're generally relatively small dollars. The exception would be the Walmarts, 7-Elevens, Dutch Bros of the world, but they do a lot of mom and pop delivery, a lot of small convenience store deliveries still with the products that they do. And so taking orders in the old system that they were in took a ridiculous amount of time per transaction. We're talking, 20 clicks again instead of 5. If you're Amazon, it's a 1 click, right? We all know how that goes. And so in order to be competitive, they had customers who now wanted real-time visibility from the dealer side, the customer side. They wanted visibility in ways they never needed before. So we're talking about things like electronic data interchange, which Walmart demands or they won't do business with you. Business intelligence tools is another place where the leadership team really needed a different experience in order to move as quickly as they could in making data-driven decisions. I'm trying to think of some other things they needed. Oh, the mobile apps as well. So for the mobile access, that kind of anywhere access, which is almost a given in any system you're putting in now, the solution they chose needed to have that not only for the route drivers delivering the product and having those handhelds with all of that information about what they were going to deliver, but also the sales team on the back end when it was delivered, when they were invoiced. How are things going? They're getting ready to call. The salespeople would go back out and call on these customers on the back end of the deliveries. How are things going? What's going well? What's not? What are the volumes? What are the dollars? They need to have access to that all on their handhelds. And so what we really encourage our organizations to do, our clients to do. Not every process on this list is going to be the mothership for your organization, but there's definitely there's usually about 4 in here that kind of make or break you. For a lot of our manufacturing companies, that's things like order to cash, demand to supply, procure to pay. I was looking here at the other one I was thinking about, but the one, demand to supply, I said that already, but the one that really gets you into the production and the scheduling, that process matters a whole lot. So really using the resources that we're talking about today, the elements of the solution strategy, the plan, the roadmap, to really optimize those processes in your organization is going to be really, really critical. Next, let's talk culture and people. This is the soft stuff that people love to ignore, particularly when it's not your sweet spot, right? Not everybody loves to what they think of as touchy-feely conversations. You know, I've met more than my share of CEOs and CFOs who just want us to get the job done. And what I find is, you know, even when this isn't an explicit part of the project, we sure encourage our project managers, our internal project teams at our clients to just be thinking about this as much as they can. It'll make it all go a lot better. So initially we're having conversations like, you know, what are the organization's core values? What are things that matter to them? So as an example, Umpqua Dairy, right, I mentioned a minute ago, yeah, they were a pretty conservative company. They've been around a very long time. And so for them, it was very much a command and control kind of place, right? The leadership team said do, and the employees did, and everybody cared about one another, and there's lots of love going around, but there was definitely a style in the way they executed actions and processes, and it was a lot of a no questions asked kind of place. And so when you look at those core values, how do you build a communications plan within that framework so that as you take on these projects that they're asking you to do is one that will be successful for you? Other questions to ask, you know, what are the qualities and characteristics of your company culture? How many employees are there today, and how are they going to respond and adapt to change? So these are all things you want to look at within your organization. Going forward, you know, if you look forward into the next 3, 5, 10 years, consider the following, right? We know that our workforce is changing rapidly. And if our organizations are growing, we're going to really need to look at how many people do we need and in what skills areas, not just for the projects that we're doing, though that's important, but also down the road, who are these folks going to be, and do I have the right mix of the right people, and where am I going to have challenges in finding these people? Not only in, you know, a small town in Southern Oregon are there challenges right now. We're seeing all over the country a number of areas where getting the right experience and the right folks on the team in a timely way to do some of the things these companies want to do or to keep up with the growth that they're experiencing is possible. So it'll impact your roadmap. It'll impact how quickly sometimes you can do things, or you may need to be creative in how you outsource certain roles, either permanently or temporarily, and just the need to be creative in this way. Next, we want to talk about technology and solutions. Again, what solutions do you have today? What are you going to need in the future? Again, thinking back to those core processes, if I am order to cash dependent, what systems need to be tied together and how? How will I do that? Some things to think about. And this is, and again, this area in particular is where a couple things come into play. One is these questions when they're being asked, there's a culture and a company bias that tends to factor into the response to these questions. So, for example, if I'm again, I'll use Umpqua Dairy again. If I'm Umpqua Dairy and I am going to choose an integrated solution, what they actually, this is what happened for them. They were biased toward a very niched vertical product that only did dairy. This was 10 years ago. And at the time, that wasn't so much uncommon, except that they didn't realize where the market was going and that the market was moving toward integrated solutions. And those solutions were starting to be able to cover their vertical. Now, a year or two before that, it wouldn't have been able to, but they were kind of on the cusp of that, didn't realize it, and also didn't realize that the vertical solutions for their particular industry were actually going out of business and having other challenges that they just weren't aware of. And so they were highly, as we talked about in the video, very impacted by that. But organizations tend to go into this conversation with a bias of one way or the other. In-house or outsourcing. 10 years ago, you know, any company, all of our companies were doing everything in-house. Now, this conversation is, again, there's a bias that the company typically has going in. And what we try and do is work with the staff, the executive team, if they have in-house IT here, There was a time when our in-house IT folks felt like they were going to be displaced by this whole cloud or outsource model that some companies are using, because it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when technology is going to the cloud. This is all the tech, all the servers, all the applications. We're not seeing that yet, of course, but we are seeing an awful lot of it. And so companies go in with a bias for a lot of different reasons. And what we try and do is help them see, where is the market today? Where is your company? Are you able to, which pieces are you able to take on and which make sense for you in the short run, medium term, and long term? So we're able, these are the questions you want to ask, but be aware that there's a internal bias regardless of where the technology is or is going. The other things to think about, uptime requirements, right? What type of industry are you in? Banking is a great example where we see tremendous uptime requirements. Amazon is also a very great example. My retail, of course, they're not a client, but my retail clients that function like an Amazon, right? The online e-commerce clients. This uptime requirement is really, really matters. In fact, I've been known to, when my internet goes down for some reason, to see if it's me or the outside world, if you will, or Comcast or whoever the internet provider is at the minute. I'll sometimes Google some of my my bigger retail clients, because if they're up, I know it's me, right? Because they are highly incented to be up all the time. Security and compliance, this is not only kind of basic security, but also for some of our clients in some of the high compliance areas like food and beverage, where there's just a lot of additional compliance requirements that are needed in their technology and their systems. We see this in banking, of course, as well. Vanilla or customized. This is a conversation you want to have, much like the in-house or outsourced conversation. Companies come in with a bias, organizations and individuals come in with a bias, and have a certain experience with the solutions they have today. Oftentimes they're very customized, and so convincing them that a vanilla strategy going forward, and the reasons for that, or why that might be a good idea for the organization, are something that you want to sit down and make sure you have a conversation about. Other questions are just having a real clear understanding of what applications you have today, considering those against your core business processes and the things that matter to you. Additionally, the deployment model, we talked about that a little bit. How fast is your internet connection? Sounds silly, but when you're thinking about some of these other things, your internet connection, we have a client where their corporate office is in Portland and their production facility and most of their employees are down in, I want to say, not Walnut Creek, but in a small town, basically a agriculture community down in California near San Jose. And their internet connectivity there is really limited, and so they had to go with an internal on-site server solution for their ERP there, despite the fact that the corporate footprint up in Portland was completely and totally outsourced. So they had to be really creative and flexible in that way in order to get the job done. And then finally, which applications of the ones you have, which ones are up to date, which ones are supported, and what does this mean going forward? Okay. So next, our next step, we want to talk about minding the gap. What do we mean by mind the gap? What we're talking about here is, we're looking at all of these different pieces. We've looked at all of these elements. And again, we looked at them really quickly, but we'll send you a list of a whole bunch more questions to look at. And once you've walked through all those elements, you're going to look at today, and you're going to have a little more. You're going to look at today, and you're going to hopefully get some clarity on where it is the organization is trying to go in all of those areas. This effort alone for an organization, Umpqua Dairy size, this is could be a 2 to 3 month exercise for the planning piece. To give you a gauge, I always say, the length of the biggest initiative, any project, you're going to want to spend a third of the project planning. So if you've got a 4-month project, or a 3 or 4 month project, you probably need a month's worth of planning to get everything aligned. So just sort of think about it from that perspective. But once you get done with this process, you're going to have a pretty good idea of what your gaps are. What are you dealing with today, and what are the issues and actions required tomorrow in order to get to that place you want to go? So the question now is, what do I do about the gaps? How am I going to, I've got this list of questions, a whole bunch of answers, Now it's a matter of really sitting down and looking at those gaps and trying to lay them out on a roadmap. Think of it from, getting from one place to another, from here to Kentucky, from here to New York. Start laying those out. And what you're going to see very quickly, and we do this in a visual way with our clients typically, lots of white paper, whiteboards in a conference room, and it takes a number of passes. You got to stop and start it just to have the stamina to stay with it a little bit. But in a relatively organized way, and with the team internally that you have, start to lay out the pieces where you see the gaps. So starting with the elements and the resources that the organization have, you're looking at your gaps, which are your issues, which are the action steps you need to take. You start laying those out, and you're going to quickly see where the dependencies are. So for example, again, using Umpqua as the example in this case, they wanted to put in a route accounting solution. What that is essentially automating the drivers who were all paper at one point. So you have the order to cash process, and they are the delivery. They are the shipment element of that, if you will. And once it got into their hands, they had a pile of paper for the 20 or 30 routes they were going to deliver to in a day, and having to keep all of that straight and figure out what they were going to do with that. Well, they knew they needed to automate that for a number of reasons, and they also knew that they couldn't. They needed to do that before they could do the ERP system, and they needed to do the IT network before they did either of those. So from a big picture perspective, those are some of the big initiatives that we saw for them, where as they started laying out the issues and actions, you start to see these big dependencies show up. And then from there, you drill into each of those areas. For example, I need a network. What does that mean? And now you're looking at all the elements on a more detailed level relative to putting in a network, right? The people, the processes, the technology that you need. And you're starting to look at the budget and the timeline and the cost and the scope of that effort. And that's where you start getting into the detailed plan within your roadmap. So again, we're starting with the elements at a very high level. We start laying it out on a roadmap. And then eventually we're able to drill into that roadmap to create truly a plan to get from here to there in a way that'll support the organization. And also, I would say, recognize the fact that different organizations are so different in how much they can take on, the way they take it on, how long it will take. It's dependent on size and industry and staffing and a lot of different things. So recognize that whatever this looks like is probably going to be individualized to your organization. But at the end of the day, you really do want to have some level of project plan, which includes your scope, how big is the effort, how long is it going to take, what's it going to cost, who's going to do the work, those types of things. But it's there that you'll begin to have a more detailed task list of what needs to be done in those bigger conversations. So again, these are a lot of details for each of these elements. You can look at it as a very overwhelming task. And what we really want to do is encourage our clients to start from the very top. Don't start on a particular project, but at least make an attempt to look at it from an enterprise-wide perspective. It's the thing that really, these elements are so interdependent, but if you start at the tip top of it all and you work your way into the details, what we find when working with our clients, it's a lot more digestible way to do it. I will also add that if you can convince the executives team that this is the way to go, they get on board relatively quickly, more often than not, because for them, when we dive way into the details, we lose them pretty quickly. So actually starting at the higher level is more effective for them as well. Again, the 80-20 rule holds here. Do the best you can, uncover as many of the gaps as you can, knowing that your goal is to have the most optimized business process that you can have while still maintaining and understanding you're trying to manage risk, you're trying to save costs, you're trying to save time, you're also trying to save the burn on your resources, right? These projects sometimes can mushroom into a place where we burn people out. It's difficult for them to do their day jobs at the same time. So again, doing the best you can to get as much answered as you can before you go into it will help reduce the risk overall, and also help ensure that you really do get the return on any individual project within the project portfolio, if you will. So, all right. Well, as we move toward getting close to wrapping up this afternoon, want to just touch on a couple small things here. Critical success factors. We talked a little bit about these as we were going through, and I just want to touch on them kind of more specifically. When you're going through any change process, it really has a huge impact on your people, your process, your organization, the culture, the day-to-day business, if you will. And so, again, the more organized, the better, of course. But we talk about this as being probably the most critical success factor for any major change initiative within an organization, and that is that the executive team's on board. I know more than one or two of you have had this experience where if they're not on board, it makes it a lot more difficult. And next, what we talk about is experienced leadership. Now, again, this can be really someone, manager, senior manager, an IT department head sometimes. Sometimes this is my controller, an operations manager, where they really do have some project background, some management background in putting large initiatives together. And I think also you find at that level, those folks also have a pretty strong sense of what do they know and what do they need help knowing, right? And we'll hopefully go and also ask for help from the other internal functions in the organization as well as outside the organization. And next, employee involvement. This is a big deal, right? In any initiative, if you're going to ask somebody to change, when we asked Carol to change at Umpqua Dairy after 45 years of doing it her way, this was a big deal. And so we involved her from the very beginning. And initially it was kicking and screaming. And eventually she was our biggest cheerleader. And so it's that type of involvement is going to make a big difference. And finally, regular communication. I can't say enough about this particular piece. And I think that the more proactively you can communicate upstream, downstream, within your project teams, the more success you're going to have in really being able to nail the initiatives that you're being asked to do, and the projects that you're being asked to deliver. And at the end of the day, being able to deliver an enterprise solution strategy is a pretty complex thing. And so letting people know what you're doing, why you're doing it, what are the assumptions around it, just having a real regular cadence for communication within the organization will really serve you well as you start taking on those actual initiatives. And then finally, we talked about this a little bit in summary. I wanted to just summarize this real quickly. We talk about enterprise solution strategy. If you recall when we started, we're really talking about how do you utilize all of the organization's resources, those elements that we talked about earlier, company, culture, people, process, systems, and technology. How do they all come together to really optimize the core business processes and accelerate the rate of change? You want to consider where you are today and where are you trying to go. What are the gaps that are going to hold you back and you have to look at in order to get where you're trying to go? What are the actions required to meet your objectives? And what are the interdependencies of those resources? These are all critical elements. And with that, I want to thank you so much for joining us today. We've ended up with enough time for some questions if you have them, and certainly want to open them up for questions. I'm going to go ahead and I don't know that we have a whole lot of questions today. Just give it a few minutes here. All right, well, folks, thank you for joining us today. I want to just talk a little bit about what's next before we wrap it up. Some additional tools and templates are going to come your way. You'll get those from John later today. And then finally, we've got a couple more upcoming webinars. You can certainly find those on our website. The next two you see right here. Next week is how to select the right ERP for your organization, followed by how to prepare your organization for change. And then finally, we would love your feedback. As I said, this is kind of our maiden voyage doing these on GoToMeeting. And not sort of in person where we're looking everybody in the eye during the process. So You'll get a survey from, I probably will come through SurveyMonkey, I believe, or John Santon. We would really love any feedback you'd be willing to offer as we try and improve and do our best work each time, do a little better each time we do these. So with that, I thank you. To connect with us, this is how you do that. And we'll thank you so much for your time, and we'll see you next time.